Amazing. The future of sending human beings into space. With commercial organizations playing a more prominent role in sending humans into space, governments, regulators, and even companies themselves are not quite sure what these herald for the new space age to come. This panel will help us understand the future of sending humans into space and the respective role that government and commercial companies will play. Introducing our moderator to discuss that and much more, Aaron Stein, Chief Content Officer from Metamorphic Media, and our phenomenal panelists, Jared Isaacman, astronaut and commander, Inspiration 4 and Polaris program, Laura Crabtree, co-founder and CEO of Epsilon 3, and David Korsmeyer, Ames Acting Deputy Center Director for NASA. Thank you very much.
Right. Well, thank you everybody for coming. It's a pleasure to be out here in San Francisco, and it's a pleasure to be up here with all of these panelists. And the way that we're going to do this is we're just going to go straight down the row with a few opening questions and start off our discussion here. Laura, maybe I'll start with you because I know you've been involved on the commercial side for a long time. And you were one of the engineers that helped put the US back into crewed space flight, into the crewed space flight business. And you did so at a time when there was a real need for it, right? And can you take us back to that moment, when you started and discuss what it was like and the need for commercial industry to assist with space launch and space flight?
Yeah, going back to the 5 or 6 years before that, we had gotten Dragon to a repeatable process where we could launch every couple of months and get to the station, bring cargo to the space station, and we were writing a proposal to take humans to the space station next. And I saw this as a huge opportunity to do something that only countries had ever done before, and I thought this would be very, very meaningful for the US to be able to have that capability again. And over the next 5 or 6 years, getting that capability ready, training for that mission, which I know Jared is very familiar with, it was a lot of time commitment from the huge team at SpaceX. And when we saw finally the launch of Doug and Bob to the space station, it was a huge weight lifted because we knew that we had accomplished something once they were in space, confirmed separation from Falcon 9. It was a moment that you can't ever prepare yourself for. So I will say that at that moment, I did have a little bit of a break in my composure. I started crying a little bit, and I think, realizing how much the future was going to change on human spaceflight and where we could go with commercial companies, I thought that was really pivotal.
Yeah, we were talking backstage a little bit, we all have children, about how our children, you want to take that? There you go. About how our children watch space flights and almost take it for granted, right? In the way that maybe we don't. And Jared, I think you're a perfect complement to Laura, right? In that, as your bio said at the beginning, you were the commander of Inspiration 4 and you were using Dragon to go into space. And you have plans for more space flights. We were talking about that backstage as well. So tell us about how you view the future of space flight, particularly commercial space flight. What you've encountered, because I know you've been at the forefront of this, and some of the challenges and opportunities you've identified.
Yeah, sure. Well, first, very, very appreciative. Laura, her team, the thousands of people at SpaceX and NASA as well that even made it possible to have a commercial mission to orbit. If you think about it, prior to Inspiration 4, the only organic ability to send humans into space lived with world superpowers, United States, Russia, and China. So it says a lot about what reusable rocket technology has done in order to open up space now where you have this possibility of commercial missions, and you have other sovereign nations sending people to space too that otherwise wouldn't have had access to it. So this is really cool, but to answer your question of what are some of the biggest challenges coming back, it's still the question of why. Like, why do we need to do this at all? It seems there's a very, binary view on this, which is like, let's hit the pause button on everything and just solve every problem that exists here on Earth first. Or the other side to that whole argument is it's like, let's give up. Like, we've already destroyed this one time to populate Mars, as if that's like a really great option to move to. And the answer is like, it's a little bit of both. And in fact, like the vast majority of resources should be here, but we know so little about what's out there. And you can like look to like, the whole human DNA thing of like, we are explorers and we want to go out and seek answers to questions. There's plenty of just good like national security reasons too. It is the high ground, and who knows what we're going to find out there that completely alter our course here on Earth, whether that's like 3D printing organs or like finding a new source of energy. So to me, coming back, it's still a big question of why. That's a very debated topic, but there are so many reasons why we should continue to take care of our home planet here and see what we can find out there.
Well, Dave, I guess you'll come up here in the initial round because, as your bio said, you come from the NASA side of things, and you're also involved in crewed space flight, albeit again from that NASA side of things, less so from the commercial. And so, how has NASA's role changed in this industry, like over the time, with particularly the new entrants from the commercial market, alongside government programs as well to continue crewed space flight?
Well, NASA has always. I need the mic. NASA has always used commercial industry and commercial partners, right? We were founded in 1958, and we came out of the box strong with the Mercury, Gemini, Apollo missions, but we used industry at that time too. It was just more of a build to print. We designed it, they built it. As things evolved and technology got improved and improved, finally in the 90s it looked like industry was going to mature enough, have enough technical wherewithal of their own, manufacturing industry, to be able to pull it off. And SpaceX came along, and don't forget the government helped SpaceX initially with the initial grants, the initial funding. We're the funder of first choice for a lot of commercial space activities. But it's a great benefit to us to have a thriving industry that kind of can live and survive somewhat on its own. It's to the benefit of the US government, it's to the benefit of NASA that we get to do this. And with all due respect, NASA doesn't just do low Earth orbit stuff. We're out at the moon, we're out at, Saturn and Jupiter. We're looking with the James Webb Telescope. We're also looking back at our Earth for climate change, for, changes in our environment. So having a very viable low Earth industry capability, housed in the US, housed in Europe, housed in China and India, all around the world, this is excellent. This is why we were created as a agency for the US federal government, right? To find out how to use space and aerospace technology for the benefit of all mankind. It actually says that in the law that established NASA. That's our job. So starting up and seeing industry basically flourish, it's exactly where we want it to be.
So speaking of flourishing, and we'll stay with you for a second, Dave, is industry does appear to be flourishing. As we were saying, this is becoming more commonplace. But I do think that there's still regulatory challenges. Again, we were talking about some of those regulatory challenges backstage. What has that been like? If you were talking about, say, the 1990s up until 2023, we have about 30 years here, right? And we still haven't quite figured it out. So, where is it going? What are the things that need to improve, particularly from the government side?
Well, like you said, there's a lot of, NASA has been a bit of a monopoly for doing space stuff for the US federal government. And so now that's spreading out. NOAA has always, the National Oceanographic Administration has always been looking back at the Earth. But now the FAA is a regulatory agency. They managed aircraft flying around the country. Now they manage the actual in and out of orbit capability for commercial industry. And we're learning the new rules that need to play out, and we're learning the new ways to make it happen. And for example, we're also buying commercial crew services eventually to the lunar surface. Again, working with now SpaceX and Blue Origin as two contractors. We're making it up as we go. I mean, that's the polite way to say it. We don't know what we're doing because it's the first time we're trying it this way. And industry is taking a great technical lead to do it, but the government is trying to figure out how to regulate this, and we're not the only actor out there anymore, right? India, Chandrayaan-3 just landed on the south pole of the moon. Congrats to them. But there's other sovereign agencies, other sovereign countries, China, India, right? Israel's going out there, Japan's going out there, right? Russia's going out there again. Everybody wants to play in this space, and how to coordinate that, that's where we've got this thing NASA's trying to encourage other countries to sign called the Artemis Accords, which is just like a best practices document. Hey, when we go there, we should tell you we're going there. And when we're not going there, we should say, hey, we're not going there, and we're going to be in this orbit this long, and we're going to stay here this long and go away. That's simply the best practices of sharing. It's like maritime shipping. You don't want all the boats coming into dock at the same time. You just take your turn and coordinate. And that's what we're still trying to figure out for space.
Well, Jared, maybe I'll come back to you, and I'm playing off the making it up as you go along, because I like that. I know that you have a good story from 2008, at that time from when I think you were out in Kazakhstan with the Soyuz launch. As you've been involved in commercial spaceflight, not necessarily from the beginning, but really as it started to take off here, what's been its trajectory since that first trip in 2008 to where you're about ready to lead more missions into space?
Yeah, I guess first just to be super clear, I have been an admirer and observer from a distance. I'm super lucky to be able to really watch the history that's unfolding around me. That absolutely SpaceX is doing a large part and standing on the shoulder of giants from NASA and everybody who contributed before that point. I guess my observations and just kind of where we're at a techie conference here is wasn't always easy. Right? Talk about disruption. Right now, SpaceX, I think, is pretty much, single-handedly bringing up a large portion of the mass to orbit every single year, with close competitors like China behind. And it's a capability we should be super thankful for in a number of respects. They had to sue their way there. They had to fight a lot of different government agencies to have the opportunity. I think that's a good point for reflection as we have startups all over this conference right now thinking about, you want disruption enablement for a number of reasons, including the competitiveness of our nation. It's not always easy, right? It's a tough battle to get there. But I think it's pretty extraordinary to see it today. Especially, the ability to, land a booster, recover it, and pretty, rapidly reuse it. Again, just speaking at a tech conference, how many times when you see a competitor, enter the market, some groundbreaking step forward from a technology perspective that you don't see a second place competitor 6 months behind. You got an iPhone out there, and then, you got the Android 6 months later, right? They started landing rockets on ships in 2015. They've done it well over, I think, 150 times. No one else has really done it once yet. Whatever that formula is for success, somebody's got to crack the code on it and spread it everywhere, because it's needed not just in aerospace, but across the defense sector and all across technology. It's pretty extraordinary. So I'd say, just watching at a distance from '08, not easy at all, and I think that's the reality of any disruptor and any tech startup disruptor out there. It's an uphill battle, but you wind up getting a good formula for success and all the right ingredients. You have some pretty eye-watering things that are taking place.
Laura, we'll come back to you. It's talking about maybe the software. Maybe you want to pass the mic. The software involved in this, because again, I think you started in 2009 working on this. 2010, and you continue to be involved in this space. I think what we see in the aerospace industry more broadly, and correct me if I'm wrong, is software becoming the main driver rather than the actual mechanics of how things work. So when you talk about landing a rocket back on a ship and all the precision that goes into that, what was your role in that? And then, where do you see the future as you plug in and continue to work on the software aspect of this?
Yeah, I think what we've seen is the hardware. You can see and touch hardware, but you have to have the software backbone to drive hardware development, to have traceability, and to really move quickly, especially with all of the startups and such small teams. You have to have really good software to enable small teams to do more with less. And so that's why, I think part of the future of spaceflight is in the software. It's in the flight software, it's in the ground software, it's in automation, it's in, enabling people to do more with less, just kind of inherently. And then going back to something Jared said, which is taking risk. How do you calculate what risks are acceptable to take? And especially with human spaceflight, there is a very hard line on what risks you can and can't take. And through the development of sort of that first mission, we had to figure out where that line was. And going back to what Dave said, which is you make it up as you go. Where is that line, and how do we define that? And it is really, really tough to do, but you have to be okay taking some calculated risk to be able to move quickly.
Well, let me stay with you, Laura, because the question I had about risk, I think, comes up particularly, if you think about the early days of space flight, there were lots of accidents, okay? And I think there are more accidents now, that continue to go on, but these accidents are things that are indicative of the challenge of the entire enterprise. This is difficult, right? To send humans into space, to send robots into space, to send anything into space. So talking about, particularly coming from a commercial side, when you're trying to judge that risk, how does that work when your perhaps main funder may not necessarily be the government at the outset?
Well, I think you have to have enough risk in the early, so you have to take risks early on in your life cycle to know that when you finally get to launch, you will succeed. And so we took a lot more risks early on in the development, both in hardware and software, and I was mostly involved in the training side of things and making sure our crew knew what to do when certain things went wrong and what they needed to do in the entirety of their mission. But I think the risks, when you fully calculate all the risks that need to line up for success, you basically need to stack all of that early development with all of the risks so that you have more chance of success at the end.
Jared, I saw you nodding your head. Did you want to add something to that? Or if you don't, or if you want to expand a little bit, given that you have been into space, you have accepted risk in ways that I think people on the ground have not. And I know in some of our personal conversations that you identified things or trainings or approaches, and then you make it up as you go, that you have to then figure out to lessen that risk, particularly for crewed spaceflight as you move forward. So what are your thoughts on this?
At least what, look, gravity's a pain in the ass. So, you got to have a controlled explosion to, accelerate an object to escape it and get into low Earth orbit. And that's, that's a lot more challenging than a 737 taking off from a runway where, you've got your risk threshold down to a pretty low point. What I'd say is, first starting just with SpaceX, that I've never seen a better, mission-driven organization. You got 10,000 people who show up to work every day that really believe that they can't make a bigger difference in the world than they're there, and it's about a very grand vision of making life multiplanetary. They're very smart. They're very aware that any setback could derail the path to that vision very, very quickly. So they think they're cognizant of that. Second, they've had such close cooperation with NASA for a long time. Get 60 years of lessons learned. When they approached a commercial launch like Inspiration 4, the same process and structure that goes through a NASA astronaut mission to go to orbit was applied as well. And again, I think it's not that this isn't an organization that is afraid of risk. They're teaching us all a lot about failing fast and iterative design cycle, but they separate the organization very effectively. And that was like our day one orientation. Is there is a part of this organization that's going to jump up and down and cheer when a rocket explodes, and that's what's happening down in South Texas. And we're going to learn quick because we believe this is the best path to really open up space for everyone. And then there's another side of the business that launches from Kennedy Space Center, and that's one where we'll never stop listening to data, we'll never stop looking for small incremental improvements, but we don't take needless risk here, and one very much enables the other. I totally agree. You have to take some risks. The environment alone necessitates it. It's not easy to get into low Earth orbit or beyond, but you can have good, I think, philosophies and approaches to execution that minimize, the risk you're accepting.
Dave, did you want to jump in here or anything else?
Yeah, sure. I very much agree with what my two colleagues also stated here. It's a lot about not whether or not there's going to be risk in doing something, always, especially in the space environment, deeply risky environment. But it's all about knowing your risks and managing your risks and learning from your risks, right? And that's what SpaceX as a company, a good example, many of the startups these days are doing. They fail and they don't hang their head and go away and live in a cave. They fail and they learn. And that's the necessary thing to do it. So it's when you're doing a new thing, when you're starting up something for the first time ever, you're going to have risk, and you need to figure out what those are. You need to track them out, and then as you start doing things, you're going to find new risk, and you need to write those down and track those as well. And then sometimes you've figured out, no, I've solved that. That's no longer a big risk, right? I'm not going to have the astronauts run out of air. I figured out how to keep enough air in the ship, so we're good. But now maybe splashdowns is a big deal. Okay, so I'm going to track that risk, and I'm going to make sure we test for it and track it and make sure things happen. And if there's a failure in a test, you'll learn from it. And it's all about learning from the risks, the behaviors, and iterating on it. And that's a practice that NASA had to kind of carve out from the original World War II era, Cold War era, and industry has picked it up beautifully and is doing a phenomenal job of doing this, and actually is now leading in some areas, which is what they should be doing. But it's all about when you do something first, when you do something that has never been done before, do it with deliberation, and when you fail, because you will fail, somewhere along the line, hopefully incrementally, hopefully not putting people at risk, but when you fail, you must learn from it and iterate so that you won't fail again.
So let me ask you a follow-up about the iteration aspect of this. If we think about maybe you think about the Apollo program or something that comes along those lines, it's that build to print, is that you create the contract and then the rockets are built. Now it's almost opposite, right? And that people are coming to you and looking for this. How does then the agency or NASA look at this in terms of its own willingness to accept risk? You understand what I'm saying there in terms of how it would facilitate and how it would accept new entrants into the market, and then be part of the apparatus that sanctions crewed spaceflight.
Well, that's the beauty of having commercial industry, multiple organizations out there doing things, right? The market somewhat decides based on can you deliver. The government, NASA here, is just another market, right, for getting people into space, for getting cargo up in orbit. There's a lot of, Dish and DirecTV and AT&T, and everybody wants things in orbit now. Starlink's in orbit, right? Kuiper's going to go up. People are launching things for, Earth observation, planets looking down, taking pictures. So there's a whole market outside of NASA that drives industry to certain behaviors and to put up their best capability. And when they succeed, the market goes, yes, we like that, do it again. And the competitors see, that's the way to succeed. So I need to copy and emulate that and make it better. And repetition minimizes risk. You learn over and over again. As you start riding a bicycle, you become better, right? You don't fall over as much. You don't, run into the curb. And it's through that practice and that repetition that we're benefiting, right? Because instead of, paying for the second bicycle ride, it's already been ridden 15 miles before we ask you to do it again. And so now when we ask SpaceX or Blue Origin or other companies in the future to do things, they're going to have industrial experience, greatly minimizing the risk, making it a better purchase for the government, meaning it's probably going to be a cheaper cost, it's going to be more efficient, more valuable, so your tax is going to better productive activities and not paying for very risky activities. So it's just a great environment now to have kind of a thriving industry focusing on getting into low Earth orbit.
Jared, maybe I'll come to you, because I know there's a couple of windows, when do you plan to launch again? Because that will ultimately be success in that sense, in this next phase in the process of commercial crewed human spaceflight. And talking about that, if you had to define where you want this to go, where you want this entire enterprise to go, where do you see it going?
Polaris Dawn, which is the first of 3 Polaris missions, should launch in the first quarter of 2024. So we announced the Polaris program like a year and a half ago. It is a test and development program, so it's it's a lot of things that either haven't been done since the last time we walked on the moon, or haven't done at all, and it's really all in in support of the broader SpaceX vision of making life multiplanetary, and that the vehicle that aims to achieve that is Starship, and that is the final of the 3 Polaris missions, is the first crewed flight of Starship. That could be the 737 of human spaceflight. I mean, to give you a sense of Starship, I think a lot of people have seen the pictures of it. The nose cone of Starship has more habitable volume than the entirety of the International Space Station. And they have 2 factories building lots and lots of Starship. So it could be a real game changer, but there's an awful lot to accomplish between now and then. So, for example, we have 3 mission objectives on the Polaris Dawn mission. The first will be, the highest Earth orbit ever flown, the farthest we've been to the Earth since the last time we walked on the moon. So right under the Van Allen radiation belts, and that has a lot of implications for like human physiology, vehicle design. Vehicles don't like lots of radiation. We'll come down from there. We'll do a spacewalk with a new spacesuit. Why does that matter? I mean, because if you believe all of this is going to happen, and that we're going to get to the moon or Mars, then you're going to want to get outside the vehicle, and whether you're exploring or building something, you need to do it in a suit that doesn't cost like lots and lots of dollars. You need to have something that you can mass produce at reasonably low cost, and there hasn't been new spacesuits built in a very, very long time. And then just how you're going to communicate. So this is all like the whole Polaris program, which is totally in support of SpaceX's vision. Like we're again playing a very small part in it. And, is if you believe there will be a Jetsons World with like hundreds of rockets going around. There's a lot of stuff we got to figure out. Suits is one, and then the final objective is we're going to communicate over the Starlink constellation using laser communication. And why does that matter? And there's an article very recently about the Deep Space Network out there. There's a lot of national assets that are under a lot of demand. Demand signal very, very high right now. As commercial space and cost of accessing orbit goes down, a lot of people need to leverage ground stations and TDRS satellites and such. Well, we've already got thousands of Starlink satellites up there, and if we can use them to communicate, it alleviates some of the burden on the Deep Space Network. So that's like, it's an answer of what we're kind of contributing into it, but really it's the end state is, get that 737 of human spaceflight going, and we don't necessarily know what it's going to create. It's more than certainly just the idea of populating another planet. Until costs get down to such an extent, it's really hard to predict, what the future holds with low Earth orbit and beyond. It's pretty exciting. So.
Well, Laura, we're coming to the end. We got about 3 minutes left here, but I think a lot of people, me included, want a glimpse into the future. If you think about the original with Gemini, Apollo, and moving forward, we have this very standardized view of what it should look like, and now obviously it's changing. Are we going to a Jetsons World where you can just book a ticket on kayak or whatever, and you can hitch a ride into space?
Yeah, I mean, I think we all hope so. That's why we're all here. I want to help enable that future, and why I spent so long at SpaceX and why I'm doing what I'm doing now. I think I would book a ride. I would go to space, especially on a SpaceX vehicle, because I fully trust it. But I think, what we're going to see in the next, 10, 20 years, I don't know if we're going to get to Mars in 10 years, but I'd love to see that in my lifetime. I'd love to see, more space stations in low Earth orbit, more destinations for research and development, for actual, just going to visit and experiencing it, knowing that life on Earth is very precious, like Jared said, and we need to preserve that. There's a lot more that we can do and probably will do in space as we see more and more private companies. But in order to have that development and have those breakthroughs, we do have to have a lot of funding to do so. And NASA was a huge partner to getting SpaceX over that hump of that first space flight. And they took a lot of risk on us and a lot on the SpaceX mission. And we need more partners to kind of continue to fund a lot of the research and a lot of the next generation of what we'd like to see in space.
Jared, are we going to have an easy launch in 20 years? That we can book an easy ticket, our kids could go?
Look, I was in, my last time I was in Starbase, which is where they're building and testing starships in Texas, which was like a year ago. I was going through, a tour of one of the hangars. It was the nose cone production area. and there were 6 nose cones in there. And if you're just walking by and seeing these things as giant structures, you don't necessarily appreciate that that means there's 6 starships. This was a year ago, and since that time, they've built another factory. So I certainly hope so. But what I would say is there are still so many problems to solve beyond just having that fully reusable launch vehicle that I know a lot of people are working on. I mean, just again, for a tech conference, think it through, there's no childbirth in space, there's no surgery in space, there's psychological things you have to sort out when you're on another planet and Earth is just a tiny speck and it takes maybe 9 months to come home from it. And then what the whole economy is of why we even need to be there in the first place, other than maybe not having all our eggs in one basket. So awesome that we're making so much progress, and SpaceX is making a lot of progress, and NASA and the whole industry that's going into really launch vehicles and structures. There's a million other problems to solve if we're going to live in that Jetsons world.
Dave, I think the final word is yours. Where do you see the future going?
Space in general?
Space. Are we going to this Jetsons world?
The beauty about space is there's always more of it. There's always more up and out. So as humanity moves industry, the economy into low Earth orbit, and then we move into cislunar space, which is in between the Earth and the Moon, and then eventually to the Moon, that's only just the first steps out into the ocean. You're not even out to the little nearest island, which truly is Mars. And once you're there, that's only the very edge of a very, very big ocean. There is so much more to do, and there's so much more to benefit, both economically and technically and scientifically, by doing this, and I believe socially and culturally as well, to expanding humanity as a species out into space. I mean, there's a there there. There's not just the vision of that, but every time we go and do more things, we learn more. And as we learn more, we benefit locally here on Earth, and that's what we're trying to do.
Well, with that, I want to thank everybody for listening, thank our 3 panelists, and enjoy the next panel.